Between 793 and 1066 AD, a group of Scandinavian farmers, traders, and part-time pirates terrorized, explored, and accidentally improved most of the known world. They were the Vikings, and almost everything you think you know about them is wrong. For starters, they did not have horns on their helmets. That was invented by a costume designer for an opera in 1876. The designer thought it looked cool. It did look cool. It was also completely fictional. Real Viking helmets were plain iron bowls with a nose guard, significantly less dramatic. Nobody made an opera about those. They also did not spend all their time raiding. Most Vikings were farmers. They grew barley, kept livestock, fixed fences, and complained about the weather. Exactly like everyone else in medieval Europe, except with better boats. The word Viking itself meant pirate raid in Old Norse. Going Viking was something you did, like going fishing, you went raiding, came home, fixed your fence, argued with your neighbor, and went back to farming. A career option, not an identity. Most Norsemen never went Viking at all, but the ones who did go Viking were something else entirely. It started in 793 AD on a small island called Lindisfarne off the northeast coast of England. Monks were living there peacefully in a monastery doing monk things, when long ships appeared on the horizon. What followed was so sudden and so brutal that people across Europe assumed it was a sign from God. The Vikings had arrived, the monks had not been consulted about any of this. The long ship was the reason all of this was possible. Viking engineers built the most advanced vessels in the world. They were shallow enough to sail upriver, light enough to be carried across land between waterways, fast enough to outrun anything else on the water, and stable enough to cross the open Atlantic. A long ship could land directly on a beach, unload an army, and be back in the water before anyone organized a response. There was no defense against a weapon that could appear anywhere. Within decades, Viking raiders had hit England, Scotland, Ireland, France, Spain, and the coast of North Africa. The monasteries of Europe were particularly popular targets because they were full of gold, run by pacifists, and tended to be near water. Medieval monks had a terrible morning several times per century. Now let us talk about the people involved, because Viking history is full of characters that make everyone else in medieval Europe look boring by comparison. Ragnar Lothbrok. His name meant shaggy breeches, hairy pants, essentially. The greatest Viking legend in history was named after his trousers. He raided up and down England and France, eventually leading 120 ships up the Seine River and effectively capturing Paris. The French king, Charles the Bold, paid him 7,000 pounds of silver to leave. Ragnar accepted, got his men extremely drunk celebrating, and went home. Charles the Bold stood in the ruins of his dignity and his treasury and had a very long think about his life choices. Ragnar eventually met his end after sailing to England with only 2 ships to prove he was braver than his sons. This plan was not received well by the English. He was captured by King Aella of Northumbria and thrown into a pit of snakes. His last recorded words were reportedly that the little piglets would squeal if they knew what the old boar was suffering. This was both a threat and a poem simultaneously, which is extremely Viking. His sons found out they were not happy about it. Ivar the Boneless, Bjorn Ironside, and their brothers assembled the largest Viking army England had ever seen and invaded with such totality that history called it the Great Heathen Army of 865. They captured King Aella. What happened next is too dramatic to describe in detail, but historians refer to it as the Blood Eagle, and nobody involved had a good time. Bjorn Ironside, son of Ragnar. His name literally meant bear of iron, which required considerably more effort than his father's trouser nickname. He raided France, Spain, crossed the Mediterranean, hit North Africa, and raided Italy. His fleet reached a city he believed was Rome. It was not Rome, it was a smaller city called Luna. Bjorn, not wanting to look like he had made a mistake, devised a plan. He sent messengers to the city saying he was dying and wished to convert to Christianity and be given a proper burial inside the city walls. The bishop agreed. Bjorn was carried in on a funeral bier. When the gates closed behind him, he stood up, killed the bishop, opened the gates for his men, and raided the city. Luna was then informed that it was not Rome. Historians describe this as creative navigation. Harold Fairhair became the first king of a united Norway after making a promise. He swore he would not cut his hair until he had conquered all of Norway. He spent 10 years looking increasingly desperate before finally winning and getting a haircut. That contemporaries described as an enormous relief for everyone in the room. The hair was apparently legendary. The hair was also the first step towards something that explains a lot about the Viking Age. Once Harald had united Norway under himself, all the Viking chiefs who did not want to be under Harald had to go somewhere. And they went to Iceland. Iceland filled up, they went to Greenland. Greenland was not particularly green, they named it Greenland anyway on the basis that a good name would attract settlers. Eric the Red discovered Greenland after being exiled from Iceland for getting into too many fights. He was exiled from Norway before that for the same reason. He spent 3 years exploring Greenland, returned to Iceland, named the place Greenland, despite the fact that it was mostly ice, and convinced an entire community to follow him there based entirely on the name. He was an excellent salesman and a terrible neighbor. His son Leif Erikson sailed further west around the year 1000 AD after hearing a story from a sailor who had been blown off course and seen an unknown land. Leif found it, and he landed in North America. He called it Vinland because of the wild grapes. He built a settlement. This was approximately 500 years before Christopher Columbus arrived. Got the continent's location badly wrong and received all the credit anyway. Leif went home and was largely forgotten for 9 centuries. Columbus went home, never admitted he had found a new continent, and got 5 different countries named after him. History is not always fair. Harold Bluetooth, yes, the same Bluetooth your phone uses, was the king of Denmark and Norway in the 10th century. The Bluetooth wireless technology was named after him in 1997. Because the engineers who created it were big history fans and liked that, he had united different Danish tribes through communication rather than conquest. And the Bluetooth symbol is actually a combination of his initials in runic script. Harold Bluetooth united Denmark, his technology legacy, united your headphones, to your phone. An unusual but consistent career theme, his son Sweyn Forkbeard briefly became the first Viking to conquer all of England. In 1013, he was king of England for 5 weeks before dying. His son Knut the Great then conquered England again, and this time actually ruled it properly, governing both England and Denmark simultaneously, and being considered one of the better kings England ever had. England was conquered by Vikings so effectively that the Vikings became English. And then England was conquered by the Normans in 1066. The Normans were the descendants of Vikings who had settled in France, adopted French culture, and learned French manners. England was essentially conquered twice by the same people, who had different accents. The second time, the Viking Age ended with the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. The last great Viking king, Harald Hardrada of Norway, invaded England with a large force. The English king Harold marched his army north at impossible speed, appeared before Harold Hardrada, before any defense could be organized, and defeated the Viking army in a hard and brutal battle. Harold Hardrada was killed, the Viking Age was effectively over. Harold then immediately received news that William the Conqueror had landed in the south. And he marched his exhausted army back south. He lost the Battle of Hastings. England changed hands again, this time to Normans. Harold is remembered for having the worst week of any medieval king. The Vikings left behind something more lasting than raids and battles. The English language owes them words like sky, knife, window, husband, anger, and happy. 5 days of the week are named after Norse gods. Tuesday is Tyr's Day, Wednesday is Woden's Day, Thursday is Thor's Day, Friday is Freya's Day. You thank the Vikings every time you make plans for the weekend. The Viking Age touched everything and most people do not notice it at all, which is exactly the kind of quiet conquest that lasts forever.